So what makes this call interesting is that usually whenever I talk to people, I go through like a detailed thing of everything that they went through and I ask some questions as we go along. But this guy, we didn't do that this time, but the conversation just flowed the way that it flowed. And you'll see what I mean when you listen. He's a very interesting way of putting things. And I think that he said a lot of things that are very valuable and worth it. So yeah, leave a rating if you guys can and enjoy the show.
Yo, Jack Flex, answer the fucking phone, dude.
Hello.
Jack.
So, if you don't mind, tell me a little bit about your childhood, your parents, if you have any siblings.
I'm a middle child of three brothers. So me, my little brother, and my older brother. I have mom and dad still alive. My dad is a lawyer. My mom is stay at home. I was raised in the city of Charleston, West Virginia, until we moved to kind of like a smaller town outside of it. St. Albans is the name of that. I mean, there's a lot, like anybody else in my childhood. There's like so many things that make up a life. So I don't really know. Like, I really have a strong relationship with my father. My mother, like I said, she stayed home, but I mean, we didn't always get along. I loved her growing up, and I still love her now. I guess as kids do, in my teenage years, sort of began to act out, and I don't know, my dad never really seemed to not get it. He always seemed to be able to speak with me in a way that wasn't isolating, I guess. So, I mean, I don't want to be like trashing my family on here, but it's just like me and my mom didn't get along.
I mean,
Me and my dad did.
I would like to say I don't view it as trashing. I view it as it's just an accurate observation on the circumstances of the relationships, if that makes sense. Like I wouldn't say it's trash talking. I'd say it's you just I feel like you're just analyzing it for what it was, and I think that as parents, it's very typical for parents to just make mistakes or to not like communicate the right way to their child because it's a lot. It's a lot to be a parent. It's a lot to effectively raise someone. I feel like it's impossible to raise someone without making some type of mistake or some type of something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that there are different types of mistakes, and I think some are very excusable, and I think like some of the ones that my mother made are inexcusable. I think that she herself was not happy, and I think that a lot of that had to do with where we lived. I think that as I've gotten older, I think done a really good job of figuring out who I am, and that has a lot to do with the way I was raised. I was raised at a young age to, I mean, I was like diagnosed bipolar at 9 years old, which is like super young. And so what that did was it forced me to have this view of myself that was very clinical, but I'm not really like necessarily a clinical person. So I'm like more of an artist, abstract, I guess, in my mind. And so, like, maybe this thing that wouldn't have been there otherwise, like if it had never happened, like if I'd just been a kid who didn't have parents who could take him to get checked out for the issues that he's having, I wouldn't have been put in front of these doctors to get this view of myself. I don't think my mother had that. So I think a lot of the issues that she has to this day are based around some of the same issues that I am lucky to have faced much earlier on. And I think because we're so much alike, and also recently I've learned that because she expects so much out of me because of how she views me. And I never really got that growing up. And only now have I put it together in a way. I can't really vouch for what she did. And the only reason that I would still continue talking about it is because it's just so much a part of my experience growing up. It was a lot of time spent in peril with her.
A couple things I'd like to say. For one, when you're talking about you having the ability to kind of go ahead and get diagnosed and to have this view of yourself, I relate to that quite a bit. Not in that sense, but in another sense where my parents immigrated, they came here, so I have a lot of opportunities economically and just career-wise opportunities that they just do not have, and I have had the ability to not only have the ability to be raised in a different country that has more opportunities, but they also put me in art classes. I was able to play soccer recreationally, different kinds of sports, and explore myself as an individual creatively and athletically. And that has helped me develop into the person that I am today in a very positive way. Like you said, I can very much relate to you in that sense of being lucky of having the opportunity to do that. And I also relate to you when you're talking about your mother and how she just didn't have that opportunity, and how it just creates like a big divide or a big difference in perspective between the two of you. And so I just kind of wanted to get into more of like this relationship between you and your mom, and like some of the things that she did that made you feel like you were in peril.
It can be summed up to say that a lot of what I did between her and I was wanting love that she wasn't necessarily capable of giving me because she didn't love herself. The older I've gotten, the more I've learned to separate, because if you look at who she is as a person, she's a great person. And that's what's really important to me, because a lot of the great that is in me and a lot of the great that I've seen in my life is because of her. But because she had that relationship, obviously, of a mother, there's so many, just...
It's very intricate.
Yeah, and there's like a lot of science back around studying it. Like it's like a super almost obvious thing. Like,
yes, it's so like innately complex. Everybody's relationship with their parents is complex,
right?
And
so
it's observable in nature too. Like with
exactly.
So on and so forth.
And I feel like to get into that would be like a disservice to the rest of what I've been through. Because like ultimately, what I want to say is, for the good and the bad of what my mom put me through, she really gave me so much more good than bad. And I think with drugs, you are self-medicating, and I was self-medicating because I was in pain, and who knows, if she had been more able to receive me in the ways that I needed to, maybe I wouldn't have. I don't know. It's just like, I don't care to put that on her. Ultimately, what I'd like to get into is society's view of drug addiction, because I think that the reality of it and the perception of it are so vastly separate. I can't really think of anything. Maybe like being an immigrant would be close to like the experience versus the national narrative would be so drastically different, because there's just so many nasty things said about people coming into America right now. And I know for a fact none of them are true, on a base level. The same goes for like people and the way that they view addiction and how those people are. Do you get what I'm saying? Does that make sense? I don't mean to be disrespectful.
No, you're not. And it does make sense. And I like the way you speak too. I can tell that you're right. Your sentences are very well thought out and they're very cohesive. You said that you had gotten diagnosed with being bipolar, right?
Yeah.
Can I ask things that kind of showed warning signs that you may have had it that made your parents go get you diagnosed?
Good question. So I was really good in school. I had good grades, and grades at that time don't really mean much as a kid, but they show like your progression. And my progression was halted. And they wanted to know why. Why was I going from making straight A's and like loving going to school to making D's and C's in third grade, where I should be, obviously, to them. So to them, what they saw was a kid who could easily take care of what was given to him. And then all of a sudden, so they got me in to see a psychiatrist who then, ran there's a story that goes along the lines of, my dad had a meeting with my teacher and she thought I should be put into like behavioral classes for mentally challenged kids. And that didn't go over well with my dad, because like, I don't know, I think maybe you can find in just speaking to me for a very short time that I'm not mentally challenged. And so like that take was so far left of what was really happening that it just felt like, you're the person who's supposed to be taking care of my kid, because I can't be there because he worked a lot, but he's still like, good Lord, I can't speak enough about him. Like, he worked a lot, had a very stressful job, and he still made time for me. If he can do that, like, why can't she at least see that that's not the problem? You know what I mean? Yeah, I get tested, and I remember, vaguely, yet still vividly going through that process, and how I could tell that my answers were interesting to my doctor. And I would imagine, because I was so young and giving because I've been told that I've always had a way of like being able to speak, even at a very, very, even much younger than 9. So like, I'm not saying I was eloquent or anything like that, but I could convey what I was feeling better than I'd say the average kid. And
Yes, and even now it's still evident. You're good at, and I'm picking this up. What I've been talking to you for like 10 minutes for the first time ever. I'm a complete stranger. I can tell that your sentences are what you're thinking and they make sense.
yeah, okay, cool. Yeah. So there's like, I think, a filter between most people's minds and then what they say and then how it feels to say it. And a lot of times I'm very lucky to feel like I got it right, you know? So going back to that, I just remember thinking that I was doing a good job because he seemed happy to hear what I was saying. But then the diagnosis was not good. So I'd imagine it was like, what I've come to find, especially now that I'm 37, is at 9 years old, that was almost 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, and this is like a big deal because people with mental illness will have like gotten mad at me in forums and in real life when I've said these things. You know, they say like, if you're depressed, go run and you'll feel better. And they say, thanks, I'm cured. There's a whole subreddit for thanks, I'm cured. I do believe that there is something to that concept, and that's why it exists. And it's not that like these ignorant people who say go run and you'll feel better because it works for me. It's not about what they're saying. These people who are ignorant. It's like I feel like I'm allowed to have an opinion on what I'm saying because I've experienced the things, and it's not to say that it's more valid as it applies to somebody else's mental illness, but it is valid to mine and what has helped me. So like if it helped me, then hopefully me having this platform right now, I can say it with a certain level of certainty and belief that it comes through, that I'm not just full of shit. Like that's the last thing I ever want to be accused of. I want to be kind, I want to be thoughtful, and I want to be honest. And so when I say go for a run, it might make you feel better. What I'm saying is, I'd say a lot of people who get mad at that statement are the same people who haven't tried it yet. It's just like,
It's a fact. Funny that you bring this up because I've been thinking about this same type of thing very recently too. Actually, about a year or two ago, I think I heard somebody say that anxiety isn't real, and very obviously, I disagree with that. There's clearly scientific evidence that this is like an actual thing that affects people. But the person's reasoning was that anxiety is fear of the future, or like anxiety is fear of things.
Depression is the past, and you know.
Yeah, and they come up
like
with
a rudimentary breakdown of the actual.
They come up with all these different like breakdowns or whatever, but there's like this slight like truth. Like,
yes,
and you see what I'm saying? Like, and I know what you're talking about. I think we're both looking in the same direction. Like, there is that grain of truth to it, where it's not as simple as like, you know, get up, go run, you'll feel better. But if you just try at something, you'll end up going on this journey of self-discovery and of accomplishment, and that over time will give you a sense of self-worth and a more defined ego. If that makes sense, does my interpretation make sense to you?
Well, yeah, it's exactly. I mean, there's a million ways to say it, or you could just leave it how you said it. It's perfect. I mean, but there's still a million other ways to say it. So like what I'm saying is the human experience is defined by each individual, and there's 8 billion of us already, right? So like here, I had this experience, right? I go in to try this basketball shoe, and the guy who's giving me the basketball shoe to try on, the guy that works there, he doesn't really seem to vibe with me. I mean, my wife was with me. She said the same thing. He just kind of seemed like maybe he didn't want to be there or whatever. And I'm like really into basketball. And I'm also really into like breaking that wall down between me and somebody who has to work and like do something for me, because I don't want them to think that I'm like making them do something or whatever. But my point is, he's got his walls up, of course, because everybody does. He's got the shoe, he gives it to me, I try it on, and it doesn't fit right. It dives in on the inside part of my foot. And I stand up and I walk around. I said, "Do you play basketball?" He says, "Yeah, I do." I said, "Do you like these shoes?" And he said, "No, I don't." And I was wondering, why? And then he continues, like, what I love is like, your walls are up, you're not saying much. But as I ask you about what you like and what you do, your walls come down. So I don't have to ask a leading question. I just say, do you like these shoes? And then you go on to tell me no and why, right? So he tells me why, and it's the exact same reason as to why I don't like them in that very moment, right? And we as humans think that our individual experience is so vastly different from everybody else's that I'm standing there while he's telling me this, thinking that there's no way that he's like gets exactly what I mean. And then I'm thinking like, shut the fuck up, Jamie. He gets it, right? So like, why do we have this embedded nature to think that like the shoe fits different for every single person? You know what I mean? Like, why are we so hell-bent on being different? And I think it's partially to validate our existence in a way, to give it more meaning, because you're different. Yeah.
When you associate yourself with something so strongly, it gives you a sense of
purpose and being, and like.
Also, I was laughing when you were saying that story because your passion is hilarious. Do you do that often?
Yeah, it's kind of, I think, off-putting. It's what my wife loves about me.
I do the same thing all the time.
Right, like, we're talking about shoes here, dude. Like, why are you so fucking passionate about it? But it's a perfect example of a thing that I've noticed a lot and finally put my finger on. You know, this need to be different. And like, I was doing it. It's not like I'm saying somebody else is doing it. And I think when you want to teach others, you have to teach through yourself, because someone can say anxiety isn't real, but like, if you've felt anxiety, you know it's
damn
real.
Well it's real.
Right. So like, even if it's a figment of your imagination, you know, our existence is completely, all of it, good, bad, ugly, beautiful, all of it is a figment of our imagination. It's an experience through a portal of our mind, like our senses. So it's not like, and that's what's so cool, is this supercomputer of our brain that's like reading all of this information all the time. It just so happens to be a lot like what you experience, you know? So like, there is beauty in being different. And when I'm a writer, you know, and I'm making art, I hope that I'm making something original and worth the time of the other person to read it. When I'm trying on shoes, maybe it wouldn't hurt so much to be more similar and accept that, because then I can get better advice. What you have to do in order to get on these, like I say, this platform that we have right now in this podcast is it's a moment where I can take what I've learned and hopefully present it in a way that lets people bring their walls down so they can bring it into their life. And whether or not it works out for them, I think the effort put in to try and see it from somebody else's way does help us evolve and grow. And I think that ultimately does a lot for our, whether it be real or quote unquote mental illness, because I'm still up in the air about all that. I know that chemicals in the brain and all that are what cause like dopamine, serotonin, yada, yada, yada. I don't believe that our science is there yet, and I don't trust it. I don't trust psychiatrists. I don't trust the drugs, and I don't necessarily trust the diagnosis. I don't think that it's accurate to say that this person has this and like you can't tell me otherwise. I just think that that's bullshit with where the science is right now. Now, maybe whenever they can go into the brain while it's being used by the human that has it and seeing all the fluctuations and then change it and see the reaction and do a scientific analysis of that, then sure, 100%. But at this point, you're not getting real life experiences inside of a CAT scan. You know, you're just not. That's something that I'm very passionate about, that like we have these disorders, and then I feel like a lot of people let that be their personality. And that's just a fucking shame. You're not your diagnosis. I know that that's like a thing people say, but like, man, I've been preaching that forever. I hate it. That, like my dad said to me once, don't ever let your hat be more interesting than you are. And to me, that stuck out, because it's like your hat could be anything. Don't let your diagnosis be more interesting than you are. Like, be something. Don't just be one thing, be all the things.
I feel like I learned a lot about you, and I learned a lot about your perspective, and that's a very good opener as to how you feel about mental illness in its current state. In almost all facets, I feel like you addressed it in just now. And I also wanted to ask about, very briefly, you know, we talked about your parents, and then we also talked about your diagnosis at 9. And then I also wanted to ask about, I'm aware that you had an addiction at one point, and I was wondering about how that started and what it was, and so on and so forth.
Let me also just say, because like it's easy to take things out of context, that like there's something attached to all that about mental illness, and to say that it's all very real in the fact that people are suffering, and I'm not taking away from that at all. Never once will I ever say that people are not suffering with these issues. I'm not making light of them. I respect everybody's experience separately. This is just my experience. As far as that next question, there's like a lot of sadness inside my younger self. And I have this need to be liked. I don't really necessarily care if people like me. There's like, different versions of yourself inside yourself, that come out or that are always there and they're vying for your attention. A part of me wants acceptance and wants to be liked. And I want people to see that me liking them means something, because I think people take my kindness as like a generic quality as opposed to a real actual feeling that I'm giving them. And then when they see that taken away, they become very aware of that fact, and it's already too late because I've gotten hurt. So all that being said, I was picked on horrendously from the ages of like 13 to 16 by a kid who...
It was the same kid most of the time?
Okay, so the story is I was getting on the bus and his little brother was standing in front of me and I said, "Get out of the way." I didn't say it nicely. I should have, but I was like 10. He was like 5 or 6. This kid says, "Don't talk to my brother like that." I don't really know what I said, but I know that I'm at that point not very confrontational. The next thing I know, he's like beating me up very badly, like punching me in the face over and over and over. And nobody is helping me. Everybody's just like watching him do it. And then finally he stops, and I think because I'd covered myself up enough for him to not be able to have any fun with it. And then he gets kicked off the bus, and then he picks on me a little bit for the next year. And then he goes to junior high and I go to 6th grade. So whatever age group that is. And then the next year I go to 7th grade, and then he has failed. So now he's in my grade, and we're at this church at the bottom of my hill, and I haven't seen him in a long time. We're like playing basketball. I'm very good at basketball, always have been. And I beat him one-on-one, and he got really mad, and he went to fight me. And I have an older brother, as I've told you, and he used to beat me up relentlessly. I don't know, it kind of clicked, like, I don't have to let this kid beat me up. Like, there's a guy bigger than him beating me up all the time, and it doesn't really hurt. So I fought him back, and I did a good job. And his brother, who was 16 or 17, was like sitting over on the other side of the court. He comes over and he says, like, "Hey man, like, leave my brother alone. Isn't your brother this guy, is Zach, is that his name?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's his name." He's like, "Okay, so if you ever bite my brother again, if I ever hear about you acting out towards my brother or not letting him hit you or whatever he wants to do, I am going to kill your brother." And obviously that's like an empty threat. He's not going to kill my brother. But like, I'm telling you, this guy is dead now. He got expelled for fighting. He went in on a high-speed chase and got shot and killed. So like, he's a bad guy. And at this time, he seemed like a bad guy. I remember seeing him in junior high. He's like supposed to be in high school. He fought 3 teachers at one time. So I'm like freaking out. And for the next 2 years, that kid literally every day would find me, and usually at lunch, and just beat me up. And there was this very separate time between the 20 minutes a day that he would pick on me or whatever, and then like the people that I hung out with. And it was almost like it was a mind fuck, because it was like, is this even really happening? It didn't bode well for my mental health. And I also like, what's funny is like, now that I'm older and I see people that I went to school with at that young age, like I thought they all hated me, and they just really did not. Like, they all are so happy to see me, and they're like, "Man, you're just so smart. Like, what are you doing now? Like, how are you doing? Like, I bet you're doing something great." I'm like, "What? Like, you guys didn't ever want to hang out with me. You didn't want to know anything about me." Like, but it's like, it's because they were kids. I was a kid. They were a kid. They were doing the best they could, and I was doing the best I could. What I've come to find is I think people think that I have more going on than I do. And I don't know why that is. But it's like, we always thought you were doing something else, is what I've heard a lot. Like, I didn't invite you because I thought you had other plans. And it's like, no. Everybody says that, so I have no other plans. So like, that all matters, because what is one of the worst things for somebody who is depressed? Isolation. And so I was very isolated. While I was at home, specifically what my mom would do to me that was very harsh was she would act like I didn't exist. I would come home and there would be no hello. There would be nothing. She'd drive me to school. There would be no conversation. She would talk to my brothers, she would talk to my dad, but like for months she wouldn't acknowledge me. So like I would go to school and I would get picked on, and I wouldn't have any type of like experiences that I can, like, even now I don't really remember much of anything good during that time happening. Like no fun experiences with classmates, no bonding experiences, anything like that. So I just was very, very isolated. So I turned into self-harm, and I also had a friend who was a couple years older than me, and he liked to do drugs, and I would hang out with him. And so I also got this attached to me that I was doing the same things. And I wasn't. I mean, I did partake in almost everything at a very young age, but none of it was like fun. I didn't understand why you would smoke weed. It just burned my throat. Pills just made me sleepy. Adderall gave me a headache. Cocaine made me feel very weird, like very weird. I remember that. And that kind of stuck with me. It was like I almost used it as a way to shield myself or something. It was a way to define myself as this like drug user out of all the kids who were too afraid to do it, if that makes sense. And I felt like that was my power. Like, hey, I can not care and ingest this drug and feel its effects, while you guys over there just, I don't know, romanticize it or something.
I've never really thought of it like that. Like, I'm the person that's willing to do this type of like mentality at that time. I never saw it that way, but that's interesting that you say that.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, there's a bunch of people who aren't giving a shit about me. Like, I'm not saying that people are watching what I'm doing or anything. I'm just saying, like,
it was like an intrinsic thing, like, like,
yeah,
it's almost like a badge to yourself. Like, I've been doing this,
right?
This is what I do, and it's validating to myself. It's a thing at the time. That's just what it is.
It was kind of like a way for me to know that I wasn't such a pussy. Like, I wasn't such a scaredy cat. Like, here I am getting picked on all the time, but yet I'm like, quote unquote, because like also drugs are cool. Like, people think, I use that term very seriously. Like, the word cool is this whole thing that I've defined for myself, and not for myself, but like I've defined it and I value it. And I think that there are different applications for it. One thing that is cool is like the unknown. Also, you could say that like cool could be something that's scary, or something that you yourself would like to do but can't let yourself do because you're afraid. Like, that's just one version of it. And I think that like hip hop music is really as affecting as it is because of its cool. So it like breaks down your wall. It makes you want to be a part of it. Like, that's kind of what cool is. You want to be a part of it, whether you actually are a part of it or not. All these things have this value of cool, like, and different people, like some people are just like, man, they're just cool. And other people are not cool at all, and what is it about them? A million different things. But like, that's why I think that word is so interesting, because
it's such a big concept when you really
think about it.
Like,
really
when you think about, it's almost a philosophical question when you ask like,
what is cool?
Yeah.
Yes.
And then it breaks down into like a million different thoughts.
Exactly. You get it. So like, I had this idea that cool is a cure for a lack of control. I put that in my book. I feel it so much because like whether you know what's going on or not, a person who looks cool looks like they know what's going on. So like, if you don't know what's going on and you feel out of like control,
it's an image thing.
Yes, exactly. So like, I can control this about myself, and I can make you value me in this way, and I can value it as well, because we have this ability to see it in ourselves and others, even if it's a lie, like even if we know that we're lying. But it's still like, cool is a way to control things when you have no other way to do it. So like, you see a lot of like minorities and whatnot, like they do certain things in society and they're looked at like as cool. Like, I mean, take any type of American that is not like straight, cis, male, white, and you can see something in their heritage that like somebody go, oh, that's really cool that you do that. Like it's almost like what makes you different. But then like, if that's the case, then why are other people wanting to do it? So you see how it kind of works against itself. Also, I want it to be known, man, that like anything I define here, I understand it's only my definition. I'm not saying that you need to believe it or like accept it. I'm just asking you to respect it. That's all I've ever. And I think people have this knee-jerk reaction to say like, because I feel so strongly about what I'm saying that I must think I'm right and you're wrong. And that's just couldn't be further from the truth.
No, I just think that you've expanded on your concepts and thought about them. And so you think about them in your own time and then you bring them to conversations. And I think that people usually aren't ready for the amount that it seems as though you think a lot in your personal time, as most writers do. So it seems as though you've thought quite a bit about the concept. So when you bring that concept of cool to this conversation, for example, and you're kind of listing off all your thoughts on it, it may come off as like that you think that you're right, but I know what you mean. It's not like you think you're right. It's just that you've thought about it so much that you've built like almost like an argument for your concept. And that's the whole point though, right? Is that when you come into conversation, usually you'd want to have your concepts challenged. A productive conversation. Like you want to...
And then yes, arguments are not inherently bad. I think that people see them like as this
it's a mental exercise.
Yeah, and it's not a fight. Like a fight is different. An argument is two people having a battle to see if they can both meet at the middle. I don't think that just because you accept my definition doesn't mean that you haven't somehow, like, just say, or I accept your definition, but we haven't necessarily changed our values or our beliefs just because I now see your point. And I think like me and my brother were talking about with politics and whatnot about how like, well, I can agree to disagree. But like when agreeing to disagree makes the earth turn like 9 degrees hotter and everybody starts dying, that's when like it really matters that we stop doing that. But in these kind of mental exercises, it's great. I think that it's something that we don't do enough.
Exactly. And damn, this conversation's interesting. That's precisely the reason why I do this, right? It's because the whole point of this is talking to people that have had certain experiences that give them certain concepts for me to pick apart and then see it from their side and understand it. And I think that their concepts are usually more valuable because they experienced it. For example, I interviewed a woman who was raped at a young age, and so like her concept of rape is much more complex and much more expanded than mine because I can think about it so much, but I did not experience it, so my concept could not grow as much as hers. As though your concept of cool is like, you've thought about it quite a bit, and you're not arguing, you're again, it's a mental exercise. But I do see what you're saying, and I mean, for the most part, I agree with how you think about the word. Damn.
So also, like, what you're saying is, would you argue with somebody who went to school for 4 years on a topic necessarily, like, on the basics of it? Like, you probably wouldn't. But it seems like people don't value that same amount in an experience, what you're talking about. Like, of course, that girl should have more of an understanding. She's experienced it. Same as if you went to school and you learned about it. But, like, for some reason, experiences are outweighed by school. Like, you can be on the job for years and it doesn't matter because you don't have a degree. Like, it's just wild. Like, to me, tactile learning is how I learn. So I could learn something in a book all day and I'm not going to fucking pick it up.
I don't think that you need to go to school to be a smart person. Okay, I will say that
no, you do not.
I think that,
but it does help.
yeah, it certainly does help. Like, for example, like I can say for a fact, like if I did not read philosophy in my own time, this conversation that we'd be having right now would be much more of a mental exercise. But I'm used to like reading like these complex ideas and sentences that frustrate me so much that I don't want to read anymore. But then I pick it back up and I keep exercising my brain. So what you're saying and the level that we're talking at right now, I can keep up with because I've had so much practice with it.
Yeah, but also you're probably not giving yourself enough credit. I'd say that it's also, it's not just those lines that you read. It's the fact that you have that curiosity. Like, once again, like, that's my wife, like, to a T. Like, she is amazing in the way that she can really give a fuck about what I'm saying. And there's like, some people are like my father. He's incredible, like the smartest man I know, but his interest in the abstract is almost zero. And
his giving a fuck level.
Yeah, his giving a fuck level is like at bare minimum. and I think that makes him much more able to be very aggressive with what he does care about. But I also think it's like maybe some untreated anxiety, because I think, like, once again, like, if you're talking about abstracts and you're talking about unknowns, and then that can cause like a knee-jerk reaction to be nervous and you don't know why, so you're just like, well, I'm not going to address that. And it's like something that I don't know how old you are, but like maybe like my age group and younger, I know you're younger than me, that's something that we have benefited from is the ability to expand our understanding of the unknown inside ourselves, and that can only make for better like legislation. Like that's what's really cool about government is it's like an applied real world application of how we understand ourselves, and that's why it makes no sense for men to govern women's bodies. Like, not to get into like abortion or whatever, but like, why would you want people who don't know anything about it on a physical, like on a very basic level, making rules for other people to live by? Whatever a group of women would come up with, I would value so much more than a senator in Alabama or wherever it was in the South who thought babies were grown in the gut. Whether you believe abortion is right or wrong, I would hope that we could agree that maybe the wrong people are deciding on it. Like, that's what I think. I think that my thoughts and opinions should be questioned just as much as the worst politician. Like, I really believe that everybody is nobody's above
and the reason
scrutiny.
why is because you're ready to demonstrate and prove your concepts,
And also willing to admit when I'm wrong. I do not. One time I got into an argument with a guy, like he got really mad at like an opinion I had, and then he pointed out something that I had never thought of before. And I said, wow, you're right. He got really mad at me because I just gave up and he won the argument. And I thought, well, that's interesting. He wanted me to feel bad, like that I was wrong. But it's like, why? Like, I mean, I get it. I get that you want me to you want to win. So that means I have to lose.
Yeah.
But like
the aim of like any type of conversation like that is not to win. It's to expand both perspectives. And if you do that successfully, then that's like actually winning.
So me like being wrong is only because I was ignorant. Now, if you choose to be wrong after finding out, then that to me is stupidity. Like, that's the difference between ignorance and stupidity. Is ignorance is not knowing, stupidity is choosing to not know. And I mean, there are other versions of stupid, but I think that at the base level, I'm going to say that that's my feeling on it.
But we are getting a bit off track.
No, and I was going to bring us back. So like, you have all these conversations that we've just had, right? And I'm a drug addict. Right? So would people necessarily think that I'm like, when they talk to me in their day-to-day life, I promise you 95% of the people, and that's a very just arbitrary number, but a very high percentage of people would almost not believe me if I told them that I was 7 years addicted, like, and almost died. And, because drug addicts are just dumbass pieces of shit who leech off of the society and are lazy and, all these things. And it's just couldn't, and okay.
It's just when you actually think about it, like the statement that or the general narrative, it's not a statement, it's a narrative.
You're right.
That is actively being proposed at all times that, people who are addicted are stupid or are, not
lazy. They don't
dumb.
have the ability to. How could you not get clean? Well, if you've ever felt withdrawal, like
exactly.
it pulls on you from every angle. Like it's not just physical. Like it's also the mental reminds you of the physical, and the physical reminds you of the mental, and it goes in waves. So like you have this withdrawal that comes to this peak, right? And it's as painful as anything you've ever felt, and it's as depressing and sad, and you want to cry and you want to laugh. Actually, you want to laugh. You feel there's this part of you that almost feels good, but it's almost like it's only there so you know how bad you actually feel. And then for like maybe a minute or two, it all goes away. And then it starts over again. And it does that for 3 days, for 72 hours, it's doing that. So imagine you had to go through the worst possible thing for 72 hours, or you could just take this pill again. It's hard. It's hard not to, because you can't work during that time. You can't put sentences together. You can't think clearly. You can't be a productive member. You can't be a good brother. You can't be a loving husband. There's nothing you can do during that time besides survive. And people, like, if they would feel even an ounce of that, they'd say, okay, no more. All right, I'm going to go back to my closed-minded judgment, and I'm just going to forget all about this ever happened. But does that mean that you shouldn't quit? No, it doesn't. That's why we need to have more laws based around getting people well, as opposed to like hurting people who are already kicked down. And people who sell drugs are usually people who need money, not people who want to hurt the world. So like there's a lot of really bad going on that's not going to fix anything.
And so can I ask, what what drugs or drug it was that you were using. I think you said for what, 7 years?
Yeah, I mean, for years, I would have said I was a drug addict because I did them all. And I mean, I was never really physically addicted in any way that I could feel because I spent lots of time not doing anything. You know, I'd drink my water and go for my runs and lift weights and read and, you know, watch TV and live a very productive life. And then my bipolar disorder would come around and it would knock on the door and it would tell me, hey, man, you're a piece of shit. Remember that. Don't ever forget it. And then I would get into super depressed state. And over time, what I would say is they call them painkillers. And the best way I can explain it to anybody who's never been through any of it is that there's not just physical pain like that you would think that people take painkillers for. There's also emotional pain, and it kills both of them. So it was a way for me to medicate and feel okay. And there was a time for a couple of those years where I said, I don't care what society says of me. I still go to the gym. I still work a job. I'm productive. I vote. I do everything. And I go get my oil changed on time, you know, every 5,000 miles. So you're not going to tell me that I'm a piece of shit. And if I choose to do it with 30 in my system, then so be it. Like, who are you to tell me? You're probably drinking alcohol. You're probably smoking weed. You're probably smoking a cigarette. You're probably eating fast food. You're probably doing something. But that was just a way for me to lie to myself, because all of those things, except for alcohol, are okay in comparison. Because like I said, if you eat a bunch of McDonald's, I mean, you could get addicted, but the slippery slope is vicious with heroin. The one false step and you're in the hole is all the way down in the hole. You're not halfway down. You're not, I almost went down. You're down. You're in it. You know, like we just talked about, getting out of it is at 72 hours. And then there's, delayed onset withdrawals. There's DAWs. There's years of fighting it. So it's not just as simple as even the 72 hours.
At what ages were you addicted?
20 to 27.
How did you manage to realize that, this is not for me, I'm going to, stop, and then you went through the withdrawal?
Well, I met my wife. It was later than that, probably 29. I had met her, and then I don't know, that really, I mean, I was still trying to get sober and I was doing all right. But I was like, the mindset had changed at 27. I wasn't any longer, this is who I am and screw the system, this is how I'm going to be. But what gave me a reason to live, I tell my wife all the time, if she wasn't in my life, I would be dead. Because I just didn't. I mean, it's as serious as that. She saved my life. I won an Academy Award for Best Screenplay. You better believe the whole 2 minutes is going to telling people about how great she is. That's what I'm going to do.
When you talk about, I think you talked earlier about being a writer, and obviously a lot of this conversation has kind of been, it's been less about your personal experience. Well, it has been about your personal experience, but it's also been about your reflections on them as you immediately use them as examples to make a broader point, I feel like. So this conversation, right, it's less personal, but it's still effective in your own way. And the reason why it's effective in your own way is because you're so much more you seem to be much more of a, like I said, I talked about how you communicate your concepts well. You seem very focused on communicating your concepts, and that seems to work to your advantage right now as we're speaking, and it helps you make things less personal. But when it comes to your writing, is that something that's very personal to you? Is that something that, do you want to take it in a certain direction as far as you know?
Well, I wrote a screenplay about a mother and a daughter. I wanted to give, I would love to give people that haven't had a voice. And it seems like the more I watch nowadays, more people are getting a voice, but I still love the idea of giving Black people, Hispanics, Asians, women, all people of color, all diversities, a space where their diversity isn't the point. And I think that that's still something that's lacking. I want to see a Black man struggle because we all struggle, not because of something particularly Black. I don't want to see a woman struggle. I want to see a woman succeed in a space where men succeed, not because she's the first to do it, but because we've gotten so far that she's the 20th to do it. And so it doesn't matter that she's a woman, but it matters to me. So a huge thing about my writing is giving other people a space in your mind, because whenever I put out my art, art is a way for me to take what's inside my soul and giving it to you so it goes into your mind. And if I can make a space for people that haven't had that, I would really be very proud to have done that. And I think I have a good ability of finding what's interesting, like what's cool. And I want to utilize that to give different topics, life and death, like what happens after death, what it means to be tortured, what it means to torture somebody, because I think we don't look at both sides of that, what it means to experience loss, but also to not be able to fully even realize it because something else is going on. Also to then be selfish and feel okay about it.
So you kind of want to explore all the facets of the human condition, if that makes sense.
No, 100%. And I want to do it in a way that is fun. And I want to do it in a way that makes you laugh, but also like if somebody came up to me and they said they read my work and like some specific part of it like spoke to them in a way that made them cry, like that would be a huge win for me. Because I think that when we cry, we're at our most vulnerable and we're at our most self-reflective. And if I can take something in my mind and put it into the world and make people feel it in that way, then I think I've done what I was put here for. And I also like the idea of leaving something for, like, I want to have a child with my wife. And I know that the state of the world isn't as good as it could be, but I want to be someone who makes it better. I want to, if not make the world better, I want to leave things behind that not are just entertaining, but speak to ideals that I hope could push through my work. So like right now, I am writing a novel only because my wife said that I should. I wanted to write screenplays and I did. And then I found out how hard it is to sell one. It's just not really the same thing. It doesn't matter how good it is. There's a lot of fucking eyes that need to go onto a screenplay to get it made because there needs to be millions of dollars put into even the cheapest movie. So a novel is much more do it yourself, get it published. You can even publish it yourself, but I believe that my writing is captivating in a way that will get somebody's attention. She told me to write a novel, so I started writing a novel. Not like she told me, so I went right and did it. She would told me for years. And then I was like, you know what? If I could get a novel written and I could get it into a publishing house or whatever, then I could get representation. And then at that point, I could get movies made. But as I started writing it, I realized that maybe I was a novelist all along. And, I'm 37, and I don't have any degrees in writing. I don't have any, I have, a couple creative writing classes, and I did go to school for sound engineering in films. So, like, I have, an artistic background, but, like, really speaking from I don't have any real credentials, so I'm going to have to rest on my laurels as far as like what this novel is going to do. And what I decided to write it on was, like we talked about, you saying that you want to talk to me about drug addiction because I know about it. Well, I thought that if I died, what would I want to leave behind? And it would be a message based around the thing that I know almost better than anybody, which is the struggle of being addicted and what it means to be addicted and what it means to, not just be addicted, but to have other things going on. And like the experiences aren't just solely based in your addiction. Like you're still a human being. Like you're still experiencing and living and doing the things. It just so happens that every once in a while you got to put more drugs in your system. And that does matter. But I think that there's a lot of interesting stories that can be told through that lens that have nothing to do with that lens, if that makes sense.